The cold air hit my lungs first. It wasn't the clean, sharp cold of winter outside, but the stale, dry cold of the house, the kind that settles deep into the walls when the heat hasn't quite caught up, or maybe the kind that seeps into the bones of a marriage when something vital has died inside it. I stood in the entryway, the envelope heavy in my hand. It wasn't mail I expected, not the usual bills or junk flyers. This was thick, official-looking, addressed to him. It felt important.
Wrong.
A faint scent of burnt toast lingered in the air, a ghost of the hurried breakfast we'd shared an hour ago, a breakfast where we talked about the weather, about work, about anything but the growing canyon between us. He'd kissed me goodbye on the cheek, a dry, perfunctory brush, and I'd smiled back, a brittle, mechanical response. We were good at this performance. We'd had years of practice. My fingers traced the return address. A law firm. Not our law firm, the one that handled the occasional minor contract review for his business. A name I didn't recognize. My heart gave a strange, heavy lurch. Not fear, not yet. Just a deep, unsettling tremor, like the earth shifting miles below the surface. I told myself it was nothing. A client issue. Business. He handled things, sometimes messy things, that was part of running his company. But the unease clung to me like a shroud. Something about the weight of the envelope, the formal printing, the unfamiliar name, whispered secrets it wasn't meant to. He was late tonight. Dinner sat cooling on the counter, the steam long gone from the rice. The house was too quiet. The television was off. My phone lay face down on the coffee table, ignored. All my senses were tuned to the silence, listening for the sound of his car, and dreading it. I walked back to the entryway, the envelope still there, on the small antique table by the door. It drew my eye, a dark magnet in the soft evening light filtering through the sidelights. My hand reached for it without conscious thought. It wasn't a choice. It felt like a compulsion, driven by that deep, internal tremor that had only grown stronger in the hour since I first saw it. Maybe it was just a bill. Maybe it was about a lawsuit against his company. Anything but the feeling, the specific, icy dread that was beginning to bloom in my chest. I ran my finger under the flap. It was sealed tight. There was no easy way in. But the corner was slightly bent, as if it had been roughly handled or perhaps briefly opened and then resealed, not perfectly. My nails found a tiny edge, a slow, deliberate tear. The sound was loud in the silence, like ripping paper, or maybe like tearing the fabric of a life. Inside, more papers. Legal size. Dense text. My eyes scanned, not understanding, then catching keywords. Settlement agreement.
Debt.
Payment. My breath hitched. It wasn't business. Not his company name, anywhere. It was a personal name. A woman's name. A name I knew. Sarah. The woman he said was just a colleague. The one whose name came up too often, whose texts he always seemed to be answering late at night, whose business trips coincided with his own.
Sarah.
My hands shook now, violently. I pulled the documents out, unfolded them. More pages. Exhibits. Schedules. A number jumped out at me, stark and horrifyingly large. $200,000. Paid in full. From our joint account. Dated 2 weeks ago. The world outside the envelope ceased to exist. The cold house, the cooling dinner, the late husband, they vanished. There was only the stark reality of the paper in my hands, the formal language detailing the liquidation of a debt, a massive debt, for Sarah. $200,000.
Gone.
Our savings. Money meant for retirement. For a rainy day. For our future. Paid to clear her name, her problems. By him. A wave of nausea rolled through me. This wasn't just an affair. This was a betrayal on a scale I hadn't even imagined. A financial betrayal. A fundamental violation of everything we were supposed to be building together. $200,000. For her. The paper felt impossibly heavy now, a stone in my gut. I sank onto the small bench by the door, the rough fabric scratching against my skin. The smell of burnt toast was suddenly suffocating. The The quiet house roared in my ears. This was not a tremor anymore. This was an earthquake. And the ground beneath me was crumbling into dust. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me bring more stories like this to you, more than you know. Our life wasn't perfect, not in the shiny magazine cover way. It was comfortable, grounded. We had the house, the two incomes that kept it running smoothly, the predictable rhythm of weekends and holidays. We built it together, brick by brick, year by year. Or so I thought. He was charming when he wanted to be, good at his job, good at making connections. I was the steady one, the planner, the one who handled the details, who made sure the bills were paid, the savings grew, the future looked secure. I liked order. I liked knowing where things stood. I found peace in the predictable flow of our life. My desire wasn't grand adventure or headline-grabbing excitement. It was simple: security, partnership, a quiet, shared confidence in the future. I wanted to grow old with this man, tending the garden of our life, watching it flourish. I wanted the comfort of shared history, the knowledge that we were a team, facing whatever came our way, together. That $200,000 wasn't just money. It represented years of careful planning, of skipped vacations, of delayed purchases, of saying not yet so we could say yes later, together. It was the physical manifestation of our shared sacrifice, our shared dreams. He traveled for work sometimes. That was normal. His business was expanding. Long hours became normal too. Late nights at the office, or so he said. I understood. I supported him. I made sure everything at home was taken care of so he could focus. I was the silent partner, the one who held the foundation steady while he built the scaffolding. Looking back, the signs were probably there, subtle cracks in the carefully constructed facade. The phone he guarded, always face down, always muted. The way he flinched if I reached for it. The sudden, uncharacteristic defensiveness over trivial things. The late-night texts he'd read with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I dismissed them. We were busy. Work stress. Men are sometimes private. I made excuses because the alternative was too painful to contemplate. The world didn't just tilt the moment I saw that settlement agreement. It shattered. The papers fell from my numb fingers onto the cold floor. The sound of the crinkling paper was deafening. Sarah. $200,000. Paid from our account. I felt a cold dread pool in my stomach, spreading like ink. It wasn't just about the money, though the sheer number was a physical blow. It was the lie, the scale of the deception. This wasn't a few hushed phone calls. This was a deep, entangled commitment. He wasn't just having an affair, he was funding her life with my future. With our future. The house was silent again, but it was a different silence now. A heavy, suffocating silence filled with unspoken accusations and the ghosts of 1,000 lies. Every quiet dinner, every shared laugh, every casual touch, they all felt tainted, retrospectively analyzed for hidden meanings, for the moments I was being actively deceived. My first instinct was visceral, primal. Confrontation. To throw the papers in his face the moment he walked through the door. To demand answers. To scream until my throat was raw. But a colder, more calculating voice, one I didn't know I possessed, whispered caution. What would screaming accomplish? He would deny. He would twist. He would gaslight. He was good at that. He would make me feel crazy, feel like I was overreacting, like I didn't understand his business and his generosity. I scooped the papers up, my hands still shaking. My mind raced, chaotic. Where did she get that much debt? Why would he pay it? What did she have over him? Or, what did he hope to gain? The questions spun like a destructive tornado in my head. I needed to think. I needed proof he couldn't explain away. These papers were a start, damning as they were, but I knew him. He'd find a way to muddy the waters, to claim it was a loan, a business investment, anything but what it clearly was, an enormous sum of our money used to bail out his mistress. I hid the papers. Not in a drawer, not somewhere obvious. I found a box in the attic, tucked away beneath old holiday decorations. It felt strangely appropriate, burying this monstrous secret under layers of fake cheer. When his car finally pulled into the driveway, hours later, I was sitting on the sofa, pretending to read. The house was still cold. The dinner was long past saving. He came in, looking tired, a little rumpled. He didn't meet my eyes directly. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his voice flat. "Meeting ran long." A meeting that cost us $200,000. I managed a small nod, a tight smile that felt glued to my face. The performance was still on. I couldn't drop it yet. Not until I knew more. Not until I had a plan. "Dinner's cold," I said, my voice unnaturally steady. "Don't worry about it." I grabbed something. Of course he did. He was taking care of himself, in every way. While I sat here in the cold house, holding the pieces of our shattered life in my trembling hands. That night, lying in bed beside him, the physical distance between us felt like miles. Every breath he took felt like an invasion of my space. I stared into the darkness, the numbers spinning behind my eyelids, Sarah's name a brand on my soul. Sleep was impossible. My mind was a battlefield. Anger warred with hurt, confusion with a cold, growing resolve. He thought he was so clever. He thought he could hide this. He underestimated me. He always had. The first few days were a blur of silent observation and internal turmoil. I moved through the house like a ghost, watching him, listening. Every casual comment felt loaded. Every time he checked his phone, I wondered if he was talking to her. The air in the house was thick with unspoken tension, a palpable pressure that squeezed my chest. I tried small, subtle probes. "Saw a law firm name on the envelope today," I said casually one morning, watching his face. He didn't flinch. "Oh yeah? What was it?" he asked, too quickly, too smooth. I made up a name. He nodded, relief flickering in his eyes before he masked it. "Probably just some marketing stuff," he said, dismissing it.
A lie.
Another layer. I started paying closer attention to his habits. His phone was the key. He kept it locked, of course. His password was something simple, something he'd used for years. I hadn't had a reason to know it, or to guess it before. Now it was a barrier I needed to breach. I tried combinations I knew he used. His birthday, our anniversary, those didn't work. Too obvious, even for him. I watched him when he unlocked it, trying to catch a glimpse of the pattern, the numbers. He was careful, shielding the screen. The emotional toll was immense. My focus at work wavered. Simple tasks felt insurmountable. I went through the motions of daily life, but my real existence was happening internally, a churning storm of betrayal and strategizing. I couldn't talk to anyone. Shame kept me silent. How do you tell your friends, your family, that your husband secretly paid off his mistress's $200,000 debt using your shared savings? It felt too grotesque, too unbelievable. I began searching the house discreetly, looking for anything else. Bank statements he might have hidden. More mail from that law firm.
Notes.
Anything. It felt sordid, rummaging through his things, violating the privacy of the man I had vowed to share everything with. But he had already violated that vow in the most fundamental way. My guilt was a minor inconvenience compared to his treachery. I found nothing obvious. He was meticulous in his deceit. He had likely diverted statements, deleted emails. The only reason I'd found the settlement agreement was probably because it was delivered by courier and required a signature, left in the mail pile while he was out. A lucky, terrible accident for me. The frustration mounted. Each dead end felt like a victory for him, for them. I was running on adrenaline and fury, but the constant state of hypervigilance was exhausting. My body ached. My head throbbed. Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were filled with abstract images of money, betrayal, and Sarah's face, a face I barely knew but now saw everywhere. He noticed my withdrawal. "You seem quiet," he said one evening, his voice laced with a subtle accusation. Something wrong? The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Something wrong? Only the complete demolition of our life, as I knew it. Just tired, I managed. The lie felt heavy on my tongue. He nodded, seemingly satisfied, and went back to his phone. His digital fortress. I needed access. I needed more than just that settlement agreement. I needed the context, the communication, the source of the debt, anything that tied him undeniably to this transaction beyond a signature on a payment authorization. The idea came to me late one night, born of desperation.
His old laptop.
The one he deemed too slow, replaced, and left in the study closet. It wasn't password protected. He'd never bothered. He didn't think I'd ever look. I waited until he was deeply asleep, his breathing slow and even. The house creaked around me as I crept down the stairs. The study was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the streetlights outside. Dust motes danced in the weak light. The old laptop was exactly where he'd left it, on a high shelf in the closet. It whirred to life slowly, a relic from a time when our relationship felt simpler, more honest. I navigated through folders that hadn't been opened in years. Old work projects, family photos. Then, buried deep in a folder labeled something innocuous like utilities, I found it. A subfolder titled
S.
My heart pounded in my ears. This was it. The folder contained emails.
Hundreds of them.
Between him and Sarah. Between him and that law firm. Communication dating back months, detailing Sarah's financial troubles, a massive debt incurred from a failed business venture, aggressive creditors, the threat of bankruptcy, her desperation, his rescue plan. Reading their exchanges was like wading through sewage. The casual intimacy, the pet names, the explicit declarations of affection, the planning meetings disguised as work trips. And woven through it all, the relentless focus on her debt. His assurances that he would handle it. His careful instructions to the law firm on how to structure the payment, how to make it look clean, untraceable back to her personal liability, using our joint funds. He hadn't just paid her debt. He had orchestrated the entire thing, meticulously covering their tracks. He discussed diverting mail, setting up burner emails, coaching her on what to say, if anyone ever asked. He was not just a philanderer, he was a schemer, a criminal. The $200,000 wasn't a spontaneous act of recklessness. It was the culmination of a calculated plan to save his mistress from financial ruin, a plan executed with cold precision, using the resources we had built together. The emails laid bare the full extent of the betrayal. It wasn't just about the money anymore, or even just about the affair. It was about the deliberate, malicious intent to defraud me, to use our shared future to secure her present. I sat there for hours, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face, tears streaming silently down my cheeks. But they weren't tears of heartbreak. They were tears of cold, hard anger. The naive, hurt wife who only saw the affair was gone. In her place was someone else. Someone who saw the calculation, the deceit, the sheer audacity of his plan. Someone who understood that this wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a legal crime. The air in the study grew colder as the night wore on. My body was numb, but my mind was sharp, focused. I wasn't just fighting for my marriage anymore. That was already dead, buried under layers of lies, and a $200,000 tombstone. I was fighting for justice. For every sacrifice I'd made. For every dream he had stolen and given to someone else. The papers from the entryway, the settlement agreement, were just the tip of the iceberg. The emails on the old laptop were the submerged, monstrous bulk. He thought he had hidden everything. He thought he was safe. He was wrong. He had left a trail. And I was going to follow it, every single step, straight into court. The raw emotion had served its purpose. It had fueled my initial search, pushed me to look where I might not have otherwise. But now, the hurt had curdled into something else, a cold, steely resolve. I stopped crying. I stopped shaking. My hands were steady as I began the meticulous process of documenting everything. Screenshot after screenshot of emails. Copies of the settlement agreement. Bank statements I downloaded discreetly online, showing the massive outflow of funds. I compiled it all, cross-referencing dates, names, amounts. It was like building a fortress of truth, brick by painful brick. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed help. Not from friends, not from family. I needed professional help. A lawyer. But not just any lawyer. I needed someone sharp, someone who understood financial fraud, someone who wouldn't see me as just another scorned wife, but as someone who had been systematically wronged. I researched divorce attorneys, focusing on those with experience in complex financial cases, asset tracing, and marital fraud. Their websites blurred together. Their photos looked stern and unapproachable. I felt a surge of anxiety. Could I even afford this? He controlled the money, or, at least, he controlled access to what was left after he paid Sarah. I found one name that stood out. A woman. Her profile mentioned her background in forensic accounting before she became a lawyer. That resonated. Someone who understood the paper trail, as well as the legal battle. Her name was Ms. Anya Sharma. Her eyes in the photo were sharp, intelligent, kind, but with a hint of steel. Calling her office was one of the hardest things I've ever done. My voice trembled as I explained, vaguely at first, that I needed a consultation regarding a complex financial issue in my marriage. The receptionist was professional, scheduling me for the following week. Waiting felt like an eternity. I maintained the facade at home, a strained politeness hanging between us. He seemed relaxed, perhaps believing he had successfully navigated whatever financial storm had passed. His casual attitude, his assumption that he had gotten away with it, only fueled my determination. I spent the week preparing for the meeting with Miss Sharma. I organized my evidence, creating a timeline, highlighting key emails and transactions. I practiced telling my story, trying to strip away the raw emotion and present the facts clearly, concisely. This wasn't about my broken heart anymore. This was about a crime. Sitting in Miss Sharma's office felt like stepping into a different world. It was quiet, orderly. She listened patiently as I spoke, her gaze steady, occasionally jotting down notes. I laid out the timeline, the discovery of the settlement agreement, the emails from the old laptop, the bank statements. When I finished, the silence stretched, heavy with the weight of my words. "This is significant," she said finally, her voice calm, professional. $200,000 is not a small amount. And the clear evidence of intent to conceal, the coordination with the mistress and the law firm, this isn't just a case of adultery. This is potential marital fraud, potentially even something more. Relief washed over me, so potent it made me lightheaded.
She saw it.
She understood the gravity.
She didn't minimize it.
"You've been very thorough," she continued, tapping her pen against her notepad. Finding those emails on the old laptop was crucial. It provides the context and proves the intent that the settlement agreement alone might not have fully conveyed in court. She explained the legal options.
Divorce was necessary, obviously.
But the key was recovering that money. Under the law, marital assets are shared. Using those assets to pay a personal debt for a third party, especially a mistress, without the spouse's knowledge or consent, was grounds for a significant claim against him in the divorce settlement. The goal wouldn't just be division of the remaining assets, but an order for him to repay the $200,000 he misappropriated back into the marital estate, or for that amount to be factored into the asset division, leaving him with significantly less. The path forward was clearer, but daunting. It meant legal battles, potentially involving Sarah as well. It meant exposing his deceit publicly in court. It meant dismantling our life piece by painful piece. But there was no turning back. The alternative was to let him get away with it. To let him keep the money he stole, the life he built on my back, and leave me with the wreckage. That was not an option. "I want to proceed," I told Miss Sharma, my voice firm. "I want to fight this. I want that money back." She nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile on her face.
"All right," she said.
"We'll fight. And we have a strong case." Walking out of her office, the world outside seemed brighter, sharper. The air was still cold, but it felt bracing now, not suffocating. I had taken the first real step, not just reacting to his betrayal, but actively moving towards reclaiming what was mine. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was overlaid with a new feeling. Purpose. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing for war. And I was going to win. The legal process began. Ms. Sharma filed the divorce papers, citing irreconcilable differences and adding clauses about financial misconduct. He was served at his office. I wasn't there, but I imagined the scene, the shock on his face.
Good.
He deserved to be blindsided. His reaction was immediate and exactly what I expected. Fury. He called, his voice tight with rage. What the hell is this? He demanded, skipping any pretense of civility. Divorce? Financial misconduct? What are you talking about? I took a deep breath. This was it. No more pretending. You know exactly what I'm talking about, I said, my voice calm measured.
Sarah.
$200,000. Our money. Silence on the other end. A long, stunned silence. He hadn't thought I knew. He thought he had covered his tracks completely. The satisfaction, cold and sharp, was immense. You went through my things? He finally sputtered, the rage replaced by incredulity and a dawning fear. You had no right. You forfeited your right to privacy when you committed fraud with our joint funds. I replied, the words steady. My lawyer has everything. The settlement agreement. The bank records. Your emails with Sarah and her lawyers. The full plan in your own words. The line went dead. He hung up. He knew he was caught. His initial legal strategy was aggressive denial. His lawyer, a slick, smarmy man named Mr. Thorne, responded to our filings with contempt, claiming the payment was a business loan to a struggling associate, a smart investment that would yield returns. He painted me as an emotionally unstable wife overreacting to harmless professional conduct. This was the rising challenge. They were trying to discredit me, to twist the narrative. Mr. Thorne demanded discovery, financial records, emails, everything. He expected me to have nothing but speculation and a misplaced suspicion about an affair. He didn't know about the old laptop. He didn't know about the emails I'd meticulously copied. Miss Sharma was unfazed. Let him ask for discovery, she said calmly. We have our evidence compiled. We will provide what is legally required, but we will not give him everything until the opportune moment. Let him dig his own grave with his false narrative. The legal back and forth was draining. Demands for information, interrogatories, motions filed and countered. Each document was a reminder of the life that was ending, the trust that was broken. The house felt even colder now, a battleground. We barely spoke, communicating only through lawyers or terse, necessary exchanges about practical matters. Sarah was brought into the periphery of the legal action. She hired her own lawyer, a sharp young woman who seemed determined to protect her client. Their defense was that the $200,000 was a legitimate loan from my husband, personally, and had nothing to do with marital funds or me. They tried to paint Sarah as an innocent party, dragged into a messy divorce. This was where Mr. Thorne and Sarah's lawyer miscalculated. They assumed the money transfer was the only link. They didn't know I had proof of the source of the debt. I had spent hours poring over the emails, researching the failed business venture Sarah mentioned. It was a boutique retail store. It had folded, leaving her with massive debts to suppliers and lenders. The $200,000 payment was specifically to clear those outstanding personal business debts. It had nothing to do with his business. It was purely personal for her. This was the midpoint shift, realizing that simply proving he paid her wasn't enough. I had to prove why he paid her and that it was purely for her personal benefit, with our money, and without my consent. The legal strategy wasn't just about the affair, it was about proving financial misappropriation and fraud. It shifted from proving adultery caused a waste of assets to proving intentional theft of marital funds for a third party's personal gain. This wasn't about him spending money on his mistress. It was about him giving away a massive asset for her private liabilities. That distinction was critical. Miss Sharma agreed.
This is the angle, she said.
We proved the debt was purely hers, related to her failed business, not his. We prove he used marital funds. We prove he did it secretly and intended to conceal it. That shows fraud, not just poor financial decisions in a marriage. The deepening crisis came as the legal bills mounted. Divorce is expensive. Fighting for a large sum of money is even more so. Miss Sharma's fees were reasonable for her expertise, but they were still significant. He, meanwhile, was likely using more marital funds to pay his lawyers, dragging things out, hoping to bleed me dry financially and emotionally. He started making things difficult. He froze a joint account I used for household expenses, forcing me to ask him for money for groceries. He delayed payments on joint bills, threatening our credit score. He cut off my access to shared credit cards. It was financial warfare designed to pressure me into giving up. The emotional pressure was relentless. Friends didn't know how to react. Some sided with him, believing his lies, or just wanting to avoid conflict. My family was supportive but worried, unable to offer practical help against his financial attacks. I felt isolated, under siege. The house felt less like a home and more like a trap. Every object seemed to mock me, a reminder of the life he had built on lies. I would sit alone in the evenings, surrounded by things we had chosen together, things paid for with the money he had stolen and given away. It was suffocating. There were days I wanted to quit, to walk away, cut my losses, disappear. The thought of the fight ahead, the stress, the cost, the inevitable pain of airing all of this in court, it felt unbearable. What was the point? Was $200,000 worth this level of agony? But then I would remember the emails, the cold calculation, the casual disregard for me, for our life, for our future. I would remember the way he looked at Sarah, the words he wrote to her while sharing a bed with me. I would remember the $200,000, not just as money, but as the physical embodiment of his contempt.
No.
It wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming my dignity. It was about refusing to be a victim. It was about holding him accountable for his actions. It was about showing him that he couldn't just destroy a life and walk away unscathed. The turning point wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was a slow, hardening process. Each obstacle he threw in my path, each cruel financial maneuver, chipped away at my fear and replaced it with pure, cold determination.
He thought he could break me.
He was only making me stronger. Ms. Sharma found a leverage point. By filing motions related to financial misconduct, she put pressure on him. She requested depositions, forcing him and Sarah to potentially testify under oath about the source of the debt and the nature of the payment. Perjury is a serious crime. Lying under oath about defrauding a spouse is particularly risky. We also prepared evidence specifically targeting Sarah's business and personal financial history, ready to introduce it to prove the debt was hers alone and originated from her activities, not his business or anything remotely related to our marital assets, other than the money used to pay it off. My financial situation was becoming dire. I had depleted my personal savings to cover immediate expenses and legal retainers. The pressure was immense. But the closer we got to court, the more focused I became. This was it. The final push. I had to endure the current pain for the chance at future freedom and vindication. I remembered reading about complex fraud cases, how the prosecution often waited until trial to reveal their most damning evidence, preventing the defense from having time to craft a convincing counter-narrative. We had our smoking gun, the emails proving intent, and the source of the debt. We would use them strategically. The court date was set. The air crackled with tension. He looked confident across the courtroom, sitting beside Mr. Thorne. Sarah was there too, looking nervous but composed, next to her lawyer. They had no idea what was coming. The courtroom was small, intimidating. The judge sat on a raised bench, her face impassive. It felt surreal, having the most intimate details of my life dissected in this sterile, public space. Ms. Sharma presented our case methodically. She detailed our marriage, our joint finances, the careful building of our savings. She then introduced the settlement agreement, showing the large sum paid from our joint account to Sarah's creditors. Mr. Thorne countered, just as we expected. He argued it was a business matter, a loan to an associate, perfectly legitimate, albeit perhaps handled poorly in terms of transparency. He focused on painting me as jealous, irrational. Sarah's lawyer supported this, claiming Sarah had a legitimate business relationship with my husband and the payment was part of that. They thought they had it covered. A business loan. A plausible explanation for the money transfer, even if the affair was undeniable. They believed the judge would see it as a messy intersection of personal and professional life, not outright fraud. Then, Ms. Sharma introduced Exhibit G. It was a compilation of selected emails from the old laptop.
Not all of them.
Just enough. The emails between him and Sarah discussing her failed business, her personal debts, the aggressive collection calls she was receiving. The emails between him and the law firm, specifically instructing them to pay off Sarah's personal creditors listed in the settlement agreement. Ms. Sharma laid out the timeline, connecting the dots. She showed emails where he explicitly stated he wanted to keep this transaction secret from me. She showed emails where Sarah thanked him for saving her from personal bankruptcy, detailing the specific personal debts the money cleared. She then called Sarah to the stand. Sarah answered questions about her business, her finances, her relationship with my husband. She maintained her composure, sticking to the business relationship, legitimate loan narrative. Then Ms. Sharma asked about the specific debts listed in the settlement agreement. These debts, Ms. Sharma said, holding up a copy of the exhibit listing Sarah's creditors. Were they business debts owed by your husband's company, or were they personal debts incurred by your company? Sarah hesitated. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably. They were related to my business, Sarah said finally, her voice low. Your business, Ms. Sharma repeated. Not his. And the settlement agreement lists you, Sarah, as the debtor, correct? Yes. And my client's husband, your friend, paid this debt, this personal debt of yours, using funds from a joint account he shared with my client, without my client's knowledge or consent, correct? Sarah didn't answer. She looked at her lawyer, then at my husband. He was staring at the table, his face pale. Mr. Thorne looked blindsided. They had prepared for questions about the transfer of funds, about the affair, about his business. They had not prepared for a detailed dissection of the source and nature of Sarah's debt, or the paper trail explicitly linking his payment to her personal liabilities, using our money, with clear intent to conceal. Ms. Sharma hammered the point home. This wasn't a business loan, Your Honor. This was the payment of a personal debt for a third party, the defendant's mistress, using marital funds. The emails prove they conspired to do this secretly, precisely to prevent my client from knowing. This is not a legitimate business expense or loan. It is a fraudulent transfer of marital assets. She then called my husband to the stand. His usual charm and confidence were gone, replaced by a defensive, cornered demeanor. Mr. Thorne tried to guide him, to steer him back to the business loan story, but Ms. Sharma's questions were too precise, too rooted in the damning emails. Mr. Husband's last name? Ms. Sharma asked, her voice quiet but carrying throughout the room. In your email to Sarah dated date, you wrote, and I quote, "Don't worry about creditor name. I'll use the funds from the joint account." Wife's name won't know. Can you explain what you meant by using the funds from the joint account and why you believed I won't know? He stammered, fumbled for words. That was taken out of context. What context, Ms. Sharma pressed, makes using shared marital funds to pay your mistress's personal debt without your wife's knowledge anything other than intentional concealment and fraud? He had no answer. His carefully constructed facade crumbled under the weight of his own words, presented undeniably in court. The judge had heard enough. She looked down at the evidence, then at my husband, then at Sarah. Her expression was grim. Based on the evidence presented, the judge stated, her voice clear and authoritative, specifically the documentation outlining the nature of Ms. Sarah's last name, debt as personal liabilities from a failed business venture unrelated to the defendant's marital business, and the defendant's own communications demonstrating intent to conceal the payment of this debt from the plaintiff using marital funds. The court finds that the amount of $200,000 constitutes a fraudulent transfer of marital assets. My breath caught in my throat. Fraudulent transfer. The words were a balm to my soul. Therefore, the judge continued, looking directly at my husband, who now seemed to shrink in his chair, Mr. Husband's last name, is ordered to make full restitution of the sum of $200,000 to the marital estate. This amount will be added back to the total value of the marital assets for the purpose of equitable distribution in this divorce proceeding. Furthermore, the court will take into account the defendant's clear financial misconduct when considering the final distribution of assets. Restitution. Full restitution. The entire amount. To be added back to the pot before it was divided. He didn't just lose the money, he was going to be financially penalized for trying to hide it and give it away. My husband's face was a mask of shock and disbelief. Mr. Thorne looked like he had been physically struck. Sarah gasped, a small, sharp sound. They were completely blindsided. They thought they could argue it away as a messy loan. They never anticipated that I had the evidence to prove it was deliberate fraud using our money for her personal gain, and that the court would order him to put the money back. His attempt to save her with my money had backfired spectacularly, costing him dearly in the final settlement. I hadn't just caught him, I had trapped him with his own deceit. The air in the courtroom seemed to vibrate with the weight of the judge's words. I sat there, frozen, the reality of it sinking in. I had won. Not just the divorce, but this battle. The $200,000 wasn't gone forever. It would be returned, at least in the eyes of the law, and he would bear the cost. Leaving the courtroom felt like walking out of a long, dark tunnel. The sunlight outside was almost blinding. I stood on the steps, the noise of the city washing over me. It was over. The legal battle, this specific, terrible chapter, was closed. Miss Sharma stood beside me, a quiet presence. "You did it," she said softly, a genuine smile on her face now. "You were incredible. Your preparation, your composure." "You were incredible," I corrected, turning to her. "You fought for me. You gave me the tools," she said, tapping her briefcase. "The truth, documented meticulously. That's the most powerful weapon." We talked logistics for a moment. The next steps in the divorce, the process of getting the money back into the marital estate, meaning he had to account for it, and it would be factored into the asset division, effectively coming out of his share. But the conversation felt distant, secondary. The overwhelming feeling wasn't triumph and joy. It was exhaustion, a profound, bone-deep weariness that settled into my shoulders, into my very core. Winning felt quiet, empty in a way. I had reclaimed the money, yes, and I had exposed his deceit. But the years lost, the trust shattered, the future I had envisioned, that was gone forever. I drove home in silence. The house was exactly as I had left it that morning, but it felt different. The coldness was still there, but it no longer felt suffocating. It felt vacant. He was gone, of course. He would be finding somewhere else to stay. Walking through the rooms, the objects didn't mock me anymore. They were just things. Furniture, decorations, memories etched into the walls. The poison seemed to be receding, slowly, painstakingly. I sat on the sofa, in the quiet living room, the late afternoon sun slanting through the window, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. So much dust. So many things hidden beneath the surface. I had learned so much in this process. About betrayal, about resilience, about the power of quiet observation and meticulous detail. I had discovered a strength within myself I never knew I possessed. I wasn't the quiet planner anymore. I was someone who could fight for herself, who could face down deceit and win. The $200,000 wasn't just money. It was a symbol of his betrayal, yes, but also of my fight, my refusal to be a victim, my victory in reclaiming what was taken. It was a validation that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts were right, that he was exactly the man I feared he was. The future was uncertain. I would have to rebuild, financially and emotionally. The divorce would finalize. Assets would be divided. The house. I didn't know about the house. Everything felt like a question mark. But the fundamental shift had happened. I was free. Free from the lies, free from the pretense, free from the constant, gnawing suspicion. The cost had been immense, emotionally, financially, years of my life. The scars would remain. The underlying sadness for the loss of what I thought I had would probably never fully disappear. But beneath the sadness, there was a quiet sense of peace. I had faced the monster in the closet, the one hiding in plain sight, and I had defeated it. I had reclaimed not just the money, but my sense of self, my belief in my own worth, my right to justice. The house was quiet, yes. But it was my quiet now. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like my own. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever felt this kind of betrayal or had to fight for what was rightfully yours, I'd love to hear your version, your thoughts. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life.